Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Amy Nickell-Turner and Theo Usherwood. Well, looking at the papers now, the Sunday Telegraph says the Prime Minister has pledged to curb benefits and government spending to fund tax cuts before and after a general election. But the Observer says Rishi Sunak will face an election headache when a new report is published describing how the Conservative government failed to prepare the country for the COVID-19 pandemic. The Sunday Times leads with the continued calls to exonerate hundreds of sub-postmasters who were unjustly convicted during the Post Office Horizon IT scandal. The Sunday Express says new figures reveal criminal gangs behind small boat crossings in the Channel have made nearly £500 million since the crisis began. The Sun on Sunday claims Kate Garraway made a desperate attempt to return to the UK with her husband, Derek Draper, after her late husband fell ill whilst receiving specialist care in Mexico. The Mirror says Prince Andrew will resist attempts to remove him from his Windsor mansion after his relationship with convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein was thrust back into the spotlight. Meanwhile, the Sunday Mail says the Duke of York is facing further scrutiny after documents revealed Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, was forced to search for the Duke's name in her phone alongside a number of explicit terms. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you will see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. OK, to Amy and Theo, who are with us now. Let's start with the Sunday Telegraph and that story that I was mentioning and that John Craig also spoke about just a few minutes ago. Rishi Sunak, I'll cut tax by curbing welfare. In an exclusive interview to the Telegraph. Theo, what do you make of it?
He's trying to draw a battle line with Labour when it comes to the economy, saying that he's going to promise to cut taxes. We know how contentious this is amongst Conservative MPs. And then, of course, challenge Keir Starmer to do exactly the same thing, knowing that he's going to find it very difficult to do so and keep Labour's spending commitments. So it's about challenging Labour. But interestingly, he talks in the interview with the Sunday Telegraph about cutting taxes for working people, making work pay, not about cutting, say, inheritance tax, which, of course, benefits the very wealthiest. And so I think there's going to be a contentious argument within the Conservative Party from those on the right of the party who are desperate for the Prime Minister to do something around inheritance tax. And, of course, it only affects 4% of estates, raising something in the region of £7 billion against those MPs, particularly in the red wall seats in the north of England, old Labour seats, who actually say you're right to focus on helping working people, national insurance cuts, that sort of thing. And that's where there's going to be, he's creating a dividing line in his own party as well as with Labour as well.
Amy, what have you made of the interview and the timing of it, I guess?
Well, I know that tax cuts are like catnip to Tories, so I can kind of see why he's put this out there in the hope that it'll catch a few eyes of Telegraph readers, particularly. But I don't think ordinary people are as bothered about tax cuts as perhaps Rishi Sunak thinks. I think ordinary people, they want to be able to afford their living and they want to see wage increases rather than tax cuts, because what is really expensive is poverty and inequality. We currently have the highest rates of inequality since the Victorian era, which has been overseen by Rishi Sunak's government. And when will he learn that you cannot trim fat and expect to fatten the pig? This is cruel. It's been tried and tested. We've seen what happens when you cut welfare. It's the legacy of austerity that has got us into this state by quite a big part. He's overseen the highest tax burden since World War II, and now he has the gall to say the way that we can decrease this is to cut welfare. I find it appalling, to be honest.
He does say in the interview, just to compare the headline to what he actually says, he says the only way to cut your taxes over time is to have a smaller, more efficient public sector. So he's
Can I tell you something else that he says? He also says, I believe in the nobility of work, and I believe work is central to people's lives.
Yeah.
Well, 40% of benefit claimants are in work.
Yes.
He's also frozen the threshold on tax bans, which has seen people giving away more of their money. So it's all a bit of a joke, really.
He did say that
we're going to see a lot more of this, seeing as it's, of course, election year. Let's take a look at The Observer, because this is also obviously relating to the elections. Key COVID inquiry report creates election date headache for the Prime Minister. So the front page of The Observer. Theo, of course, that's the big question we all have. When is he going to call the elections and what the factors are?
The really interesting thing about this these reports from Heather Hallett, who, of course, is overseeing the COVID inquiry, is rather than just doing one big report at the end, she's drip-feeding it out in interim reports. Now, the first one, she said, is going to be out, we understand, is now going to be out in the summer. Rishi Sunak said earlier this week that actually he sees the election in the second half of next year. But this report is about what happened before the pandemic, what preparations were in place when it came to PPE, what preparations were in place when it came to spending or cutting spending, not learning the lessons from pandemic planning.
So basically 2019, before 2020.
Exactly. So it's not, you can't necessarily pin it on Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss for the 49 days she was in charge. I actually think the last two paragraphs of this story are perhaps the most interesting, which is module 2 of the report, which is actually not going to be published by Lady Hallett until early next year, after any possible election. And that's concentrating on what the government did at the time during the pandemic itself. So talking about whether, Rishi Sunak and whether he actually decided, when we decided to ignore consulting the scientists when it came to eat out to help out, all those chaotic messages with Dominic Cummings and various expletives when it came to trying to manage government in the grips of the pandemic itself. And actually, it seems from looking at this report in The Observer, the government's off the hook on it.
Amy?
The thing is, I don't think they will ever be off the hook, because we don't need an inquiry. We just need our own memories. I'll never forget the image of the Queen sitting on her own at Prince Philip's funeral, and then we later found out that was on the eve of one of the alleged, I don't know if we have to say that anymore, Downing Street parties. And then it came out that Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament, which I think shows his regard for us at the time throughout the pandemic. And I don't think many people are going to need this inquiry to tell them the wrongdoings of the Conservative Party throughout the pandemic. But maybe it was interesting to read the findings about the true impact of austerity, the true impact of the distraction of Brexit, so we couldn't plan adequately for the pandemic. But I think the main reason I want to see this put to bed is for the bereaved families, because they've said the inquiry's reports must be released as soon as possible to protect us from a future pandemic. And I imagine if you are somebody that lost someone during the pandemic, you just need to see the government be held to account and then perhaps also influence the manifestos going forward for the next election.
Let's look now at the front page of the Sunday Express. I think these are basically all the topics we'll talk about, or the main ones. I think leading up to the election, it's going to be economy, COVID, and then immigration, of course. So front page of the Express, £500 million, boat gangs, huge profit out of misery. Theo, what is the story about?
So they've got the calculator out at the Sunday Express, and they've basically done some sums, and they've worked out that since 2018, just more than 114,000 people have made that treacherous crossing from northern France to the UK, and they've each paid around £4,000 a head, and they've totted it up, and it comes in at more than half a billion pounds being paid to those criminal gangs, the people who are organising the boats, bringing them to the UK and profiteering off it. And I think what's interesting about this particular story, and particularly the timing, is that, of course, there was a report, and your political correspondent John Craig was talking about it, that Rishi Sunak didn't necessarily see the Rwanda plan, which, of course, is meant to act as a deterrent for these gangs, as necessarily working when he was Chancellor, and the Treasury was sceptical about actually whether it could work. Now, of course, this headline, for those who are particularly bothered about small boats, is going to strike a chord.
Amy?
I mean, it certainly shows that Rishi hasn't managed to stop the boats, one of the infamous 5 pledges. I mean, Labour have put forward as a solution. They've pledged to get tough on these types of gangs, treat them on par with terrorists, establish a deal with the EU to share intelligence. So I think if we're looking at solutions, I'm not convinced that the Conservatives have one, whereas maybe Labour could have an answer to this, because more than 100,000 people have made the treacherous crossing, but of course not all of them made it. These are exploiting some of the world's most vulnerable people.
I mean, it obviously is a sort of, global problem, certainly a European one. So difficult to solve anyway. But Amy and Theo, for the moment, thank you. Stay with us, though, because we'll have more of the stories making tomorrow's front pages, including this leading the Sunday Times, as the fallout from the post office IT scandal intensifies. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview with me now, our writer and broadcaster, Amy Nickell-Turner, and political journalist and broadcaster, Theo Usherwood. Thank you so much for staying with us. OK, let's go to the front page of the Sunday Times. And the headline there, Post Office Fury Intensifies. And this, of course, the story about the Post Office Horizon scandal very much in the headlines. Amy, tell us a little bit about what's in the Sunday Times.
There's growing pressure for all of the sub-postmasters who were accused. Some of them were imprisoned, they lost their livelihoods, they lost their homes, they lost everything. And now there's growing pressure for them to all be cleared. And there's also questions about the involvement of Ed Davey. I think he ignored quite a few letters from a postmaster who was obviously concerned about what was happening. But I think, to be fair, he was probably being told from the post office what everyone else was
That's
being
what
told.
he says, yeah.
And there's also a petition to strip Paula Venables of her CBE. She's got a CBE. After overseeing this whole disaster, she's managed to retain a CBE. And interestingly, Alan Bates, he turned one down by principle because he said, well, if she's got one, what does it mean?
OK. Theo, it's interesting that the story had been rumbling on for so long and now very much in the headlines.
Yes, I remember covering this for Press Association, sitting in the gallery in the House of Commons doing late-night debates and MPs raising it and it being this sort of issue very much in the background.
How long ago was this?
That was back in 2010, 2011. And it was always late night. It was on a Thursday, a backbench business debate. It's very much under the radar. You'd write the story up, but it wouldn't go anywhere. It wouldn't make it into any of the papers or nobody would really pick it up. And then it's taken, 10, 12 years later, it's taken a dramatisation by ITV. And I just think it's fascinating. It's a dramatisation rather than a documentary.
Why do you think it wasn't picked up? Because, just listening to a lot of the interviews that we've had, even just on Sky News or anywhere else, it's the stories are so touching and so moving.
I think it's partly down to the fact that it was quite complicated at the time. It was to do with this computer system. There were glitches in the computer system. I'm not sure people necessarily understood it. And also it was contentious because it was being repeatedly denied by the Post Office that was pressing ahead with these wrongful, what turned out to be wrongful convictions. And now Alex Chalk is turning around and saying, actually, when it comes to these appeals process, the Post Office should have absolutely nothing to do with it. And it should just be a simple question of the CPS standing there saying, we're not going to oppose this, and actually these convictions should be quashed immediately. And I think that's a step forward because Parliament comes back on Monday, and this row is going to dominate. We're going to have calls for Paula Venables to be stripped of her CBE.
It's a compensation as well. People are still
petitions.
Awaiting compensation. I think all that money that was taken needs to get back to those people for this to really...
Definitely in the headlines now, and people are definitely talking about it now. OK, let's go to the Sunday Express, page 6. Public fear politics is driving doctors' walkouts as NHS heads off a cliff. Of course, the ongoing junior doctor strike. Theo.
Can I just look at the numbers to start off with? Because I read the headline. Are junior doctors' strikes politically motivated? Yes, 36%. No, 38%. So in actual fact, more people think that the junior doctor strikes aren't politically motivated. Should junior doctors be banned from striking? Nearly half of respondents said no, they shouldn't be banned from striking. Do you support or oppose the junior doctor strike? 44% support them. And it seems to me that the Express have got this poll through, and somebody said, write it up anyway, quickly, write it up. But nobody's actually looked at the numbers and think, actually, perhaps if we've got a certain agenda, it might be best just to put it in the bin.
No, they put it in pie charts.
Headline, it's fine.
Yeah. What did you make of it?
I just like to remind everyone that what they're asking for is 35% pay restoration, which amounts to £20 an hour. £20 an hour for a doctor. What do you pay for a plumber? Like, what, £75 an hour? PT, £30 an hour? It's £20 an hour, guys. Come on, get it together.
Quick look now at still the Sunday Express, page 2. And here it is. Sick benefits bill soars to £28 billion. Now, we have 1 minute roughly to talk about it, so Theo, you start.
We knew this. We knew this number was lurking in there somewhere because, of course, the number of working-age people now claiming this benefit's going up from 2.4 million to 3.7 million. That's an extra 5,000 people a week are going to be claiming this personal independence payment, which, of course, is to help you if you're feeling anxious in social situations, to help with washing, basic activities that people who are disabled can't do. And this is going to be a headache for whoever wins the election, how you are going to pay this, because this bill is now going to go up go up by £10 billion in the next 5 years. And the money is going to have to be found from somewhere to pay for it.
Amy?
Well, so many people are just stuck on waiting lists, and that's only the number's only getting higher. And the reason I worry about these PIP payments is because of the assessments that are involved, the accuracy, the reliability of these assessments. People have reported being completely humiliated, and they've been really inappropriate in quite a lot of cases. So whenever we talk about this subject, we need to be aware that each claimant as an individual deserves complete dignity and respect, and not just see them as like a part of a chain of just box ticking.